Alongside my colleague Ben Felder from the Oklahoman as day 7/9 wraps up of the Oklahoma teacher walkout. A lot of people are heading our way towards their cars. Looks like things are winding down on this Tuesday evening.
Yeah, not a lot of legislative action inside the Capitol to keep teachers around, but much of this crowd stayed to see teachers from Tulsa that were completing that 110-mile march that started last week here to the Capitol, and they ride this afternoon to great cheers.
I laugh about the day 7/9, 7 weekdays, but 9 days since it has started. And last week, to your point, teachers from Tulsa announced that they were in support of this. They would walk day by day. They made it today.
Yeah, they did. And like I said, there was a crowd of teachers and education advocates here welcoming them, lining the streets here up here into the Capitol. It's quite an emotional scene, actually, as they had completed their journey and made their way up to the stage. It's kind of been the center of the rally, at least on the outside. Some teachers made some remarks, and it was kind of a good, probably pick-me-up to a lot of teachers on the day, and we'll get into this in a moment, that may have raised some questions about how much longer the walkout is going to last. But it was another large crowd. I still think yesterday was our largest crowd, so maybe a little smaller today, but a lot of teachers. I continue to see a lot of parents and community members, even more so than I saw last week, that were out here to continue to try to advocate for an increase in public ed funding.
We mentioned those Tulsa teachers. Our Greg Singleton was following them as they walk this way. Look for that package later on newsok.com. You mentioned the large crowds. I heard from another source today, 50,000, which was a number that we had heard thrown around yesterday. Whether that's true or not, it was a large crowd yesterday. There were a lot of people here today. But let's dive into what you just said, and what's the tenor, what's the sense you're getting about how long this lasts?
Well, and let me start by saying, it was still a very energized crowd here today. A lot of passionate teachers, as much as they've been, teachers that are continuing to say that they'll be here for as long as it takes. But I did, in talking with several teachers, start to hear a little bit of a, I want to be here for as long as it takes, but I'm not sure how much longer we can be out here. There are some schools that are already starting to call their teachers back. As of right now, I talked to a teacher from Luther, and Luther is going to be back in school tomorrow. Bartlesville, a school district of about 6,000 students in the east side of the state, has announced that they're going to start back on Thursday. And Bartlesville had been one of the districts that had been most outspoken about increase in public ed funding and maybe leading to some kind of work stoppage. So that kind of gives, I don't want to necessarily say that's cracks. It makes it sound like the teachers are folding. That's not what I mean at all. But I think that in this standoff, in this showdown, the legislature, especially this week, has really not made any major efforts towards any large funding demands. We saw some talk yesterday about wind. We saw some other bills proposed by some lawmakers. But really, when it comes to that major revenue-raising measure, there really hasn't been a lot of effort publicly that we've seen from. Once again today, Democrats tried to bring capital gains tax, the repeal of that, to the floor. House leadership once again said that it's not going to happen this year. And so I think there are some school leaders that are starting to think, hey, the pressure mounts with every day. This is continuing to be a strain on families and parents, and we can talk about that in a moment here. I had a chance to talk to some parents today. But we're also in the middle of the testing window right now. And so I think administrators are saying, there's a line between what's best for our kids with teachers being out here and what's best for our kids with teachers being in the classroom. And, that's probably up to interpretation for a lot of people, but some schools are starting to feel like we're kind of getting to that line, and we'll just have to wait and see. What does it mean that a few schools have already said that they're going to call their teachers back? Is that going to spread, or are other teachers going to show even more resolve and say, nope, we're sticking with it, and we got to be even more strong than we've been before?
Speaking of lines, we heard a number from OEA today.
Yeah, so they put out a flyer. They've been putting out flyers and information, something to arm their teachers as they're inside the Capitol trying to advocate. They said, to quote, that the legislature can cross the finish line with an additional $50 million in public education funding. Since the beginning, OEA has asked for an increase of $200 million. A couple weeks ago, not counting the teacher pay raise, we've seen about $40 to $50 million added. So another 50, you're talking about getting closer to $100 million. And a lot of people have said that they feel like that's kind of the number that it would take. Now, we don't know where that money would come from yet. The OEA is still pushing for a repeal of the capital gains tax deduction. And once again, the House leadership has said that's just not happening this year. So we'll have to see how lawmakers respond to that. But they did put out a number of $50 million, and we'll see what they say about that tomorrow, especially as, like I said, some schools, I don't have a count, I'm not even saying it's a lot, but some schools are already starting to talk about going back. But the state's largest, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Edmond, Norman, they're still out.
As he mentioned, Oklahoma City Public School will not be in session tomorrow. I had an interview with Carrie Watkins. She's the executive director of the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum today. We were talking about various things leading up to the marathon, but she mentioned the impact of the students being out of school and how that affected the memorial and the museum. She estimated around 4,000 students had not gone through the museum. Scheduled field trips is what I'm trying to say. Had not been here as a result of the walkout.
Yeah, I mean, just when you shut down school for a couple of weeks, I mean, that has a ripple effect, and some of those issues are bigger than others, but you talk about field trips this time of year, and obviously students that are preparing for tests. We talked about it yesterday. State Department of Ed has extended that testing window by 1 week to give schools some more time, but that another extension doesn't seem likely. I talked to some parents today. I stopped by, I got to the Capitol a little later this morning and wanted to kind of go out to some daycares and child drop-off sites, just to kind of get a feel from parents. I'm kind of in this bubble. Everybody I talked to is very supportive. I wanted to kind of get a sense for what it was like outside. I talked to a mom today that she said, it's been a strain. She's got 2 boys. She works as a cashier. She's had to take personal days. She was going to a church that was providing some drop-in service, but wasn't going to be tomorrow. So she was kind of saying, hey, I'm going to have to be scrambling tonight, figuring out what I'm going to do tomorrow. But she said, you know what? It is a challenge for me, but I get it. And she said, I know what our teachers are fighting for. They're fighting for a better future for my 2 boys. And so it's worth it right now for me to put up with this if it means it's going to create a better education system. And I think, once again, there's as many, we said this today, there's as many opinions as there are Oklahomans, but I do think that there is still a large amount of public support. We talked to some union leaders. We talked to Ed Allen yesterday, and always wonders at what time or what point does that support start to shift. But I do think it's still fair to say that a lot of Oklahomans are backing the teachers. They're backing that effort. But we're now, getting to the middle of the second week, and at some point, someone's going to have to blink on this. And, you talk to some lawmakers off the record, and they'll say, hey, there are a lot of people in this building that are willing to wait it out for as long as it takes. A lot of teachers say that they're willing to do the same, and so we'll have to see what it looks like in the coming days.
Back to that interview we had with Carrie Watkins earlier today, she said, Dave, back during the bombing or after the bombing, what we saw in this community was a sense of unity, people coming together. There was some compromise at that point. She was hoping that perhaps the 2 sides could get together. Also, she wanted to let people know that Wednesday, 1:30, the kiddos will be running around the grounds of the National Memorial and Museum to get in their miles to complete their marathon on April 29th on Sunday. Let's look ahead to tomorrow, because the chocolate and the peanut butter perhaps overlap with politicians and teachers. It is filing period.
Yeah, so the 3-day filing period starts tomorrow. So statewide offices, every House seat, half of the Senate, also includes the statewide seats like the governor and such. The filing happens right here in the building. In fact, if you go down to the basement where that filing happens, there's already a sign that says, begin lining up here. They've got it marked off. I tweeted a picture of it. It's empty. I expect that to be full tomorrow. What's going to be interesting is not only is it always full at the start of the filing deadline or the filing window, is now you have thousands of teachers that are frustrated with lawmakers, thousands of teachers that have said, we need some new leadership in some of our House and Senate districts, and teachers that some of which have said, maybe I should take a run at this. So it'll be interesting to see. We've already heard of a couple names, or some people that say they're going to run. It'll be interesting to see tomorrow, how many teachers do we see? People remember in 2016, we saw the so-called Teachers Caucus. About 30 educators, current and past, had ran for office. Most of them lost. And I think that had to do more with just political realities than anything. A lot of them were first-time candidates. They were going up against incumbents. It's very hard to beat an incumbent in this state, especially one that has a bigger war chest. So we expect to see maybe some new candidates as well. But everybody wants to know, what does this moment mean for elections this year? And I think it's way too soon to predict some kind of wave election in November. But you and I have talked about it, that if there is some kind of massive change in November that surprises us all, we can probably look back at this moment and say, well, they did shut down schools for 2 weeks, and there was this gridlock between public educators and lawmakers, and that's got to have an impact in some way on how the electorate sees things. But once again, and we mentioned this morning, when you look at a lot of the Republican candidates for governor, they have not come out in favor of this walkout. Many of them had said that they would not have approved the teacher pay raise, that they do not support teachers walking off the job. Now they're centering their attention to the Republican primary voter, which is different than the state as a whole. But that kind of shows you where maybe some of the most conservative voters in the state, may not be in support of this, but then the OEA comes back and says, hey, they have some public opinion polls that show that the majority of voters as a whole still support this. So we'll have to wait and see what that looks like in November, or what that looks like in the June primaries. But yes, the election picture starts to become clearer tomorrow as we know who's going to be on the ballot over the next few days.
We'll wrap it up with this. One thing we've observed, and like I said, people are leaving at this point, the grounds have remained relatively clean. Greg Singleton points out that Office of Emergency Management has a crew out here really diligently going after the waste, the trash that comes with a crowd of many, many thousands of people. But for the most part, there's a lot of waste disposal units, trash cans, that people can use. There's not a whole lot of trash out here.
Yeah, I mean, when I've left it each day, I mean, it has been a pretty pristine grounds in a very surprising way. We've kind of likened this to kind of an education Woodstock in a way. Right. So you would imagine that there would just naturally be a lot of waste left behind. But I think that's a combination of those that are participating, doing a fairly good job of kind of picking up after itself, but obviously Capitol staff that are really doing a good job of cleaning up. And you talk about the employees out here that are working, the teachers that are out here demonstrating. There's been some intense moments inside the Capitol, particularly between maybe OEA leadership and Senate leadership and some moments like that. But for the most part outside, actually in its entire, at all times that I've seen outside, the interaction between teachers and state troopers and grounds crew has been really good. In fact, right before the Tulsa teachers marched into the Capitol or into the Capitol grounds, as the teachers lined the street waiting for them, a group of troopers were kind of walking down just to kind of get in position, and they received a roarous applause. And so, and we said it before, hey, teachers are public servants, troopers are public servants. So I think there's maybe a little bit of a feeling like they're on the same side in a lot of ways. But I mean, it's been a very peaceful demonstration, and the Capitol, as it's undergoing its renovation, remains relatively clean. Although I'm sure it's going to need a good scrub down when this is all said and done. A lot of people have been in this building over the last few days.
Look for more coverage from this guy, Ben Felder, in upcoming editions of the Oklahoma and also online at newsok.com. Are Tim Willert, Dell Denwall, and others among those providing coverage that you can find in your newspaper and online, as well as the photo staff, Doug Hoke and his crew. I know they were out here snapping away. For Todd Frazier back in the control room, Greg Singleton behind the camera, I'm Dave Morris saying good evening and thanks for watching.